Here's some information on how governmental financial statements, specifically school financial statements, may differ from the traditional GAAP financial statements of a corporation. There are still governmental GAAP because GAAP is generally accepted accounting principles, and there are GAAP as applied to schools. But I'm going to show you some differences that'll help you translate what you've learned in the classroom with what is actually happening in the financial statements for your school district. Students don't typically learn about accounting for nonprofits or governments until late in their accounting education. And that's because they basically get a grasp of what happens for an organization, understand how the organization runs, and then they can make the easy transition to handling it for a school or nonprofit entity. Because we're not in that situation, and most of you are already working in schools, I've gone ahead and taken the information according to the Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officials. And where I can, I'm going to relate the chapter to the financial statements. Where I can't, I'm going to try and provide some extra information. And the only reason there might not be an actual translation is because it doesn't really differ. The concepts of running the business are the same as the concepts for running the school. We're really only dealing with how we're going to report it. And then most of the time, it's just a terminology difference. So, for example, here we're dealing with the governmental accounting. And I'm saying it's versus GAAP, and that's just basically versus traditional GAAP for businesses. When we're dealing with financial statements for corporations, we follow FASB, or the International Financial Reporting Standards. That's sort of the highest and the first place that accountants look to make sure the financial reporting is in accordance with GAAP. When it comes to schools, GAAP, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB, is just like FASB, except it deals with the governments. So that is the highest source of GAAP guidance. After that, you've got these other groups that are listed here, the AICPA, the GFOA, and FASB, as well as other sources. And they're kind of back and forth depending on who's got the most reliable and the most accurate information. So there is a hierarchy, and it differs slightly when it comes to financial statements for corporations as for schools. The interesting thing about this is in the last several years, a lot of schools and a lot of governmental entities have switched to make their financial statements resemble more of the ones of a corporation. That helps the school boards and other individuals really able to follow along to what's happening to the organization. The purpose of accounting and reporting is the same for financial statements for an organization that's a corporation and an organization that's run by a government or an organization that's run as a nonprofit. They all kind of have the same things. They want to present everything fairly with full disclosure. We're going to talk about different objectives in a future chapter, but for right now, everything seems to translate the same for the corporation as for the school district. ASBO, as a national organization, has the same kind of standards that they want. They want to make sure the financial statements are prepared in accordance with the most current standards, and they specifically talk about presented on a generally accepted accounting basis. So as the standards change, they expect the financial reporting to change along with it. And this will take on the same characteristics that we'll talk about in a future chapter. Characteristics such as understandability, reliability, relevance, etc. Since this chapter starts with the balance sheet, I'm going to mention some of the same things I mentioned in the last chapter. But it's important to make sure you really understand the differences. First, it's terminology. It's the statement of financial position for a school, whereas it's a balance sheet for an organization. The other one is that it's net assets instead of owner's equity. The big way to remember that is there's really no owner of a school. And you could say it's the taxpayers, it's the government, etc., but there is no equity that's going to come in there. So we're going to talk about the net assets, and that's simply the assets minus the liabilities. That makes sense because if we have an accounting equation of assets is equal to liabilities plus owner's equity, then we can really say assets minus liabilities is equal to the owner's equity, or is equal to net assets. And specifically, our net assets for a school are going to be unrestricted in terms of how we spend them, temporarily restricted, or permanently restricted. And individuals who set these restrictions are the ones to dictate how the money can be spent. And how the money can be spent is often according to the funds, and we'll talk about fund accounting in a later chapter as well. But basically, the money is going to be spent so it's efficient. So really, instead of having net income, it's a statement of activities. A school district isn't expected to make money. It's not expected to have income, but it is expected to operate within its budget. So we're going to talk about that as activities for the school purposes, but for this course, we're going to still call it net income. We're still calling it revenues. Revenues are the money that are brought in. It's the tax dollars for a school district, whereas an organization who's selling items is going to be sales dollars. But it's the same type of item, and it's recognized when it's available and measured. That's what we do when we earn a revenue. The same thing happens with expenses. Expenses are reported when they're incurred. That's the same thing we do in the expense recognition. And so we're going to recognize expenses in the corporate world the exact same way. Again, the difference is going to be terminology, but the theory is exactly the same. So I hope this helps you get started with some of the things we're going to need for the next chapter and future chapters on how to handle financial accounting. Because your understanding of financial accounting, even in this early stage where we talk a lot about bookkeeping, but your understanding is going to help you really make sure you can make good decisions in the future. So I hope this information helps you. If you need anything, let me know.